The drywall dust was still settling on my shoulders when I sat across from Alina Sterling. I looked at the sleek glass table, then at the woman who would become my weapon. I laid it out clearly. But 27. I'd paid off loans, bought a house, built a six-figure business, without my parents' help. When my golden brother went bankrupt, they sued me for stealing his future. I didn't settle. I made an example out of them. She didn't blink once at my intensity. It started 4 hours earlier on a Tuesday that felt deceptively safe. I was sanding the guest bedroom walls, enjoying the scratch of grit against plaster. The house was a wreck, but it was mine, bought with cash I'd scraped together while Caleb was partying in Ibiza. Then the doorbell cut through the silence like a drill. A man stood on my porch, sweating in a cheap suit. He held a thick manila envelope tightly like it was a grenade. "Zachary Miller?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. He shoved the paperwork into my chest, forcing me to drop the sanding block. "You've been served." He turned and walked away before I could even wipe the dust from my hands. I stood there, paralyzed by the official weight of the package. The return address didn't say a law firm. It listed my parents' home address in Connecticut. My stomach dropped. They hadn't called me in months, but they were definitely speaking now. I ripped the envelope open right there on the porch steps. The legalese was dense, but the accusations were clear enough to stop my heart. Plaintiff Caleb Miller. Co-plaintiffs Robert and Susan Miller. They were suing me for tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. I had to read the sentence 3 times to comprehend the absurdity. They claimed my success had siphoned luck and resources from the family pool, directly causing Caleb's 3 failed startups. It was pure insanity wrapped in expensive bond paper. I flipped to the final page, looking for the demand. I expected an apology or a forced reconciliation meeting. Instead, I saw a number that made the air leave my lungs. $250,000. The room spun. That wasn't a random figure. It was the exact amount I had just publicly announced for my business expansion last week. They weren't just angry about my independence. They had been watching my financial reports. They were actively hunting my liquidity. That realization drove me straight to Sterling's office without changing my clothes. Now facing her, I waited for her to laugh at the absurdity of the claim. She didn't laugh. She opened the file, her eyes scanning the timeline of neglect and predation I had just outlined. She tapped a heavy red pen against the desk, a steady, rhythmic sound like a ticking clock. "They don't want a trial, Zachary," she said coldly. "They want a withdrawal. Let's give them a war." It was midnight, and my home office looked like a forensic crime scene. Boxes of financial records formed a barricade around my desk, blocking out the rest of the renovated house. Sterling had been clear about what she needed to win this war. She wanted a timeline of every dollar exchange between me and my parents for the last decade. I opened the first banking app, the screen's blue light stinging my tired eyes. The search query was simple but painful. I typed, "transfer from mom," and waited. The screen stayed blank. I switched tactics and pulled up the shared family cloud account I still had access to. It was a digital graveyard of their financial bad decisions, preserved in PDF form. I found a wire transfer from 4 years ago labeled Caleb Brand Launch. It was for $40,000. I remembered that summer vividly. Caleb had claimed he was starting a luxury streetwear line that would rival Supreme. He produced 0 shirts. That same month I had incorporated my LC. I got a text from Dad saying, "Good luck, don't ask for money." The education folder was even worse, a smoking gun of disparity. I found the tuition receipts for Caleb's time at Cornell, adding up to nearly 200 grand. My parents had signed every loan and paid off the interest monthly. I looked at my own records from state. There were no wire transfers, only pay stubs from the campus IT desk and late-night tutoring gigs. I remembered eating ramen not as a joke, but as a survival strategy. They threw Caleb a graduation party. I got a handshake and a reminder to move out. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It was a cold, hard knot in my chest. I printed the documents, the rhythmic whir of the printer filling the silence. Each page was a physical testament to my value in their eyes, or lack thereof. It wasn't just that they helped him. It was the active refusal to help me. I found an old email thread where I asked for a $50 robotics club fee. Mom had replied, "We're tight this month, honey." 2 days later, A receipt showed they bought Caleb a new gaming console. I dug deeper, looking for the moment their indifference turned into hostility. I found it in a text chain from last year. My business had just cleared its first major profit margin. Caleb had demanded I invest 10 grand into a new crypto scheme he heard about on Reddit. I had said no. That was the turning point. The text from my parents shifted from distant to demanding. Family helps family. Dad had written. They didn't see my hard work. They only saw a piggy bank they hadn't cracked open yet. I reached for a dusty shoebox on the top shelf, looking for older tax returns. A birthday card fluttered out, landing face up on the hardwood floor. It was from my 18th birthday, written in my father's distinct, jag block lettering. I picked it up, expecting a generic greeting. Instead, I read the inscription, "Self-sufficiency is your gift. We didn't help you so you would learn to survive." It wasn't an apology for neglect. It was a confession of strategy. They had starved me to make me tough, then fed Caleb to keep him weak. I taped the card to the center of the whiteboard, right in the middle of the financial timeline. It was the keystone of my defense. They claimed I stole Caleb's future. But this card proved they had engineered his failure and my success by design. I looked at the totals on the spreadsheet one last time. Caleb 530,000. Zachary 0. The disparity was so large it was almost funny. I closed the laptop with a snap. The math wasn't just uneven, it was predatory. Sterling's office smelled of expensive leather and cold determination. I dropped the thick binder onto her desk, the heavy thud echoing through the quiet room. She didn't look up immediately, her eyes fixed on a digital brief. I stood by the window, watching the city traffic crawl below like a slow-moving river. The evidence of a decade of neglect was inside that plastic cover. "It is all there," I said. "Every dollar they gave him, every cent they denied me. The math is brutal." She finally opened the binder, flipping through the bank statements I had organized with surgical precision. Her face remained a mask of professional neutrality. She paused at the 18th birthday card I had taped to the center. I saw her eyebrow twitch, a rare sign of surprise. She ran a finger over the jagged block lettering. "This is quite an admission," she whispered. She looked at me with a new level of respect. "They didn't just ignore you. They used you as a baseline." Sterling leaned back in her chair, clicking her pen with a sharp, metallic rhythm. She presented the first tactical option with a flat tone. "We can settle this by Friday. I can make a call and offer them $50,000 to go away forever. It would save you months of stress." I felt the heat rise in my neck. 50,000 was the price of a mid-sized car. It was also the exact amount Caleb had blown on his failed consulting office. I shook my head slowly, my hands tightening into fists. "No settlement. I want them to face a judge. I want their entitlement documented in a public record." Sterling didn't argue. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she shifted into attack mode. "Then we counterattack," she said. "We began drafting a countersuit for abuse of process and malicious prosecution. We would argue that this lawsuit was a shakedown intended to cover their own poor financial choices. This was no longer just defense. The legal strategy required a high-risk maneuver. Sterling explained that we needed to file a motion for expedited discovery. We would demand every single one of their financial records from the last 5 years. Credit card bills, mortgage papers, and tax returns would be exposed to the light. "If we do this, there is no turning back," she warned. I didn't hesitate. I signed the authorization form with a steady hand. I wanted to see exactly where the money went. The energy in the room shifted as we finalized the filing documents. Sterling looked at the total sum of my parents' assets versus their current liabilities. A new realization hit her. She looked up from the screen, her expression darkening. "Zachary, I just realized something. They took a second mortgage on their house to pay their lawyer's retainer for this suit." My heart skipped a beat. They were literally betting their home on the hope that I would cave and pay them out. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. They were standing on a ledge, and they were trying to pull me over with them. If I won, they would likely lose the roof over their heads. Sterling watched me, waiting for a flicker of doubt or a change of heart. I looked at the birthday card again, at the words, "Self-sufficiency is your gift." I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. I just felt ready to finish it. The conference room felt like a pressurized chamber as the deposition began. My mother sat across from me, her fingers twitching near her pearl necklace. Sterling adjusted her glasses and laid out the first bank statement. The fluorescent lights hummed, highlighting the sharp lines on my mother's face. "Mrs. Miller," Sterling started, her voice a low blade. "Did you provide $530,000 to your son Caleb?" My mother nodded slowly, her eyes avoiding mine. The court reporter's keys clicked rhythmically. Sterling leaned forward, turning a page with a crisp, echoing snap. "And what was the total amount provided to Zachary for his business or education?" The room went silent. I watched my mother's throat move as she swallowed hard. "We gave him a lottery ticket for his 18th birthday, she whispered. Sterling paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "A $1 ticket," she clarified. My mother nodded. The disparity was now a matter of legal record, etched into the court transcript forever. Caleb took the hot seat next, smelling of expensive cologne and desperation. He tried to maintain a smirk, leaning back with a false sense of confidence. Sterling didn't waste time on pleasantries. She asked him to define the interference I had supposedly caused. Caleb stammered, mentioning market headwinds and my lack of synergy. "Did Zachary ever touch your bank accounts?" Sterling asked. Caleb's smirk vanished. "No," he muttered. He was a fraud caught in a bright light, blinking at his own reflection. The power dynamic shifted when Sterling pulled out a chart of Caleb's spending. She pointed to a line item for a luxury watch purchased during his second bankruptcy. "You claimed you were destitute," Sterling noted. Caleb's face turned a mottled red. He glanced at our parents, but they were looking at the floor. "Family is supposed to share," Caleb snapped. "He has plenty." It was a confession of motive. He didn't want justice, he just wanted my bank balance to fix his mistakes. Sterling moved in for the final strike of the afternoon. She asked Caleb a very specific question about his birth order. "Do you believe you are entitled to Zachary's assets because you were born first?" Caleb hesitated, then his ego took control. "Yes," he said, his voice loud and clear. "I'm the oldest. I was supposed to be the successful one." My mother gasped, but it was too late. The entitlement was out in the open, raw and ugly. I looked at the opposing counsel, a man named Foster who looked like he wanted to vanish. He had been scribbling notes furiously, but he stopped and put his head in his hands. He knew the case was dead. You cannot sue someone for being more competent than you. The depositions had stripped away the lies, leaving only the truth of their greed. Sterling caught my eye and gave a small, barely perceptible nod. We were winning. It wasn't even close. As we gathered our files to leave, Foster tapped Sterling on the shoulder. He looked exhausted. "My clients want to talk about a settlement again," he muttered. Sterling didn't even look at him. She just kept packing her briefcase.
"We're done talking,"
she replied. I followed her out, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. But as we reached the elevator, my phone buzzed with a notification. My mother had just gone live on Facebook. The real smear campaign was beginning. I sat in my dark kitchen, the phone's glow illuminating the grain of the oak table. My mother's face filled the screen, her eyes red and puffy for the camera. She was weaving a tale of abandonment and greed. "We poured everything into our boys," she sobbed to her 300 followers. "Now Zachary wants to leave his brother on the street." The comments scrolled by in a blur of blue hearts and angry red faces. They were judging me without evidence. The digital assault didn't stop with the video. By morning, my inbox was a graveyard of family ties. Cousins I hadn't seen in years sent scathing messages about the sanctity of blood. One aunt called me a cold-blooded capitalist in a group chat. Sterling called at noon, her voice tight with professional warning. "Don't engage Zachary," she commanded. The court of public opinion is a playground for losers. We stay in the realm of facts. I hung up, feeling isolated. The pressure peaked when I arrived at my office. Caleb was standing by the glass entrance, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked disabled, a sharp contrast to his usual polished arrogance. "Just give us the money, Zach," he hissed as I approached. "You are destroying Mom. She can't sleep." He moved to block my path, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of dominance. I didn't say a word. I simply signaled the security guard and kept walking. Inside my sanctuary, I found the first real crack in their campaign. An aunt named Martha, who had always been the family outlier, messaged me privately. She didn't offer platitudes. Instead, she sent 3 screenshots from Caleb's private Instagram account. They showed him at a 5-star resort in Tulum, dated only 10 days ago. He was holding an expensive bottle of champagne while claiming bankruptcy. The power balance shifted instantly. My family's victim narrative was about to collide with a very expensive reality. I forwarded the images to Sterling immediately. The digital trail was a gift. While my mother pleaded for sympathy, Caleb was flaunting the very resources they claimed he lacked. It was more than hypocrisy, it was potential fraud. Sterling's reply was a single word: perfect. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline. The smear campaign was backfiring because Caleb couldn't help but brag about his stolen lifestyle. His ego was finally more dangerous to them than it was to me. The afternoon brought a strange silence. The Facebook video was suddenly deleted. I suspected Foster had seen the screenshots or Sterling had made a very aggressive phone call. The sudden lack of noise was more unsettling than the screaming. I paced my office, looking at the city skyline. I was winning the legal battle and the social one. But the cost was becoming clear. I was effectively orphaning myself. My victory would leave me standing alone on a very tall, expensive hill. As I prepared to leave, a new notification chirped on my desk. It wasn't a message from a relative or a lawyer. It was a Google alert for my own business name. A local news blog had picked up the Family Feud story, but they had a different angle. They had discovered the second mortgage my parents took out to sue me. The headline read, "Parents bet house to sue successful son." The world was finally seeing the desperation behind the curtain. The war was turning public. The courtroom was a vault of polished wood and frigid air. I adjusted my navy tie, feeling the weight of the silence. Sterling sat beside me, her posture a sharp angle of readiness. Across the aisle, my parents looked diminished. The local news headline had stripped away their dignity. They weren't grieving parents anymore, they were desperate gamblers. I kept my gaze fixed on the empty judge's bench. My heart beat a steady, heavy rhythm. Today was the end of the narrative they had carefully built. Judge Hernandez entered with a sweep of black robes. She didn't look at the gallery. She began reviewing the case file with a clinical focus. The rustle of paper was the only sound in the room. I noticed my father's hands were trembling on the table. He looked old. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was the man who told me self-sufficiency was a gift. Now he was here to take the fruits of that gift by force. The irony tasted like copper. Sterling stood up for our opening motion. Her voice was a calm, precise instrument. She didn't talk about feelings or family bonds. She presented the financial ledger. The disparity was projected onto a large screen for the court to see. $530,000 for Caleb, 0 for Zachary. The numbers were naked and undeniable. I saw the judge's eyes narrow as she compared the totals. My parents looked at the floor. They couldn't hide from the math anymore. The balance of power was finally shifting. Foster tried to salvage the situation with a desperate plea. He spoke about familial obligations and the spirit of cooperation. He sounded like a man drowning in shallow water. The judge held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "Mr. Foster, I have reviewed the depositions," she said. Her voice was like dry parchment. The plaintiffs admit to providing 0 support to the defendant. They also admit the defendant never touched their accounts. She looked at my parents with a cold, piercing gaze. "Explain the interference." The mid-scene turn came when Foster mentioned a verbal agreement. He claimed I had promised to support the family once I turned a profit. It was a blatant lie, a final reach for my wallet. Sterling didn't even wait for him to finish. She pulled a tablet from her bag. She played a recording of a voicemail from my father. In the message, he told me to never ask for a dime. He's on his own. My father's voice echoed. The courtroom felt suddenly very small. Judge Hernandez leaned forward, her expression hardening into a mask of disapproval. She looked directly at Caleb, who was slouching in his chair. "Mr. Miller, you testified that you are entitled to your brother's assets because you were born first." Caleb shifted uncomfortably, his bravado finally failing him. "That is not a legal principle," the judge continued. "That is a fantasy." I felt a surge of cold triumph. The lie was being dismantled by the highest authority in the room. It was finally happening. Sterling delivered the final blow with surgical timing. She moved to dismiss the complaint with prejudice. She also requested immediate judgment on our countersuit for abuse of process. She cited the second mortgage and the Tulum vacation photos. The judge nodded slowly, her pen scratching across a notepad. I watched the opposing counsel's face go pale. He knew it was over. My parents were no longer just losing a lawsuit. They were facing a catastrophic financial judgment. The stakes had reached the point of no return. The motion to dismiss is granted, Judge Hernandez announced. The gavel hit the wood with a sharp, final crack. The sound vibrated in my teeth. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. The judge wasn't finished. She ordered my parents to pay all of Sterling's legal fees. She also added a $20,000 sanction for filing a frivolous suit. It was a total victory. I had protected my house and my business. But the room felt colder than when I had entered it. I stood up as the judge exited. I didn't feel like celebrating. I looked at the three people who shared my name. They were huddled together, whispering to their lawyer. They looked like strangers I had met in a bad dream. I had made an example out of them, just like I promised. I had won the war of resources. My business was safe. My future was entirely my own. I turned to walk out, but my father stepped into my path. He looked absolutely broken. He didn't ask for money this time. He just looked at me with a strange, hollow expression. "I hope you are happy, Zachary," he whispered. "You've won everything." He turned and walked away before I could respond. Sterling touched my arm, signaling it was time to leave. We walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, indifferent sunlight. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. But as I reached my car, I saw a tow truck hooking up Caleb's luxury sedan nearby. The consequences were beginning. The victory felt like cold iron in my gut. I sat in my office, watching the rain smear the city lights into jagged neon lines. The court's judgment lay on my desk, a sharp white blade against the dark wood. Sterling had done her job perfectly. My parents were legally required to pay $80,000 in fees and sanctions within 30 days. I knew their bank balance was a desert. They had gambled their house and lost. Now, the bill was finally due. My phone buzzed with a rhythmic, frantic energy. It was my mother. I let it vibrate against the desk until it went silent. Then my father called. I ignored that too. Finally, a text arrived from Caleb. "They are losing the house, Zach," the bank called. "You won. Are you really going to let them sleep in their car?" I stared at the words until they blurred. He was still trying to weaponize my conscience. He was still avoiding his own role in this ruin. I drove to my parents' house one last time. The "for sale" sign was already staked into the lawn like a grave marker. The porch light was flickering, casting long, nervous shadows across the peeling paint. I stayed in the car, the engine humming a low, steady tune. I saw my father through the front window. He was packing boxes with slow, heavy movements. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. The self-sufficient son had returned to watch the collapse. I stepped onto the porch, my boots echoing on the hollow wood. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She didn't scream this time. She just looked tired. Her eyes were sunken, and her hair was a mess of gray. "We can't pay the judgment, Zachary," she whispered. The house smelled like stale tea and old paper. "The bank is taking everything. We have nothing left to give Caleb." She wasn't asking for help. She was stating a fact of their extinction. I walked into the kitchen, the heart of their failed empire. Caleb was sitting at the table, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey in front of him. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and full of a new, sharp resentment. "Come to gloat," he spat. "Come to see the mess you made." I didn't answer him. I looked at the wallpaper I used to stare at while eating ramen. I realized that my presence here was a cruelty I no longer wished to perform. The turn happened when my father entered the room. He held a small, leather-bound ledger. He placed it on the counter between us. "I found this while packing," he said. His voice was a dry rasp. I opened it and saw years of meticulously recorded payments to Caleb. Every car, every bail bond, every failed lease. It was a diary of a slow-motion disaster. At the very end, there was a single entry for me. $1. It was the lottery ticket. I looked at the ledger, then at my father's trembling hands. He knew I was the only one who could stop the bleeding. "If I waive the fees, you can keep your retirement funds," I said. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My mother gasped, a small sound of hope. Caleb straightened up, his eyes widening. They thought the savior had finally arrived. They thought the old Zachary was back. I felt the familiar weight of their expectations pressing down. "I won't waive them," I said. The hope vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating silence. My father's face fell. "Then we are truly homeless," he whispered. I nodded slowly. This was the irreversible decision. I was choosing the law over the blood. I was choosing the truth of their choices over the comfort of a lie. I had spent 20 years being the safety net. That net was gone. I had cut the strings myself. "You have 30 days," I told them. I turned and walked toward the door. Caleb surged up from his chair, knocking the bottle over. The glass shattered on the tile. "You are a monster!" he screamed. "We're your family!" I didn't look back. I stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking through my shirt. I felt lighter with every step. I was finally orphaning myself. I was leaving the graveyard behind. The cycle of subsidizing his failure was dead. As I reached the car, my phone chirped. It was a notification from the bankruptcy trustee. My parents had officially filed for Chapter 7. The house was gone. The retirement was at risk. The judgment I refused to waive was the final anchor dragging them down. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, the house looked small and fragile. I realized then that they weren't my parents anymore. They were just people I used to know. 5 years later, my daughter's laughter echoed through the hallway of a home built on granite. I watched her stack blocks with a focus that reminded me of my own younger self. There was no shadow of a golden brother here. There were no ledgers tracking the price of love. I had built a sanctuary where worth was never measured by a sibling's failure. The old trauma was a dull ache. I finally understood that the silence of my parents was my greatest inheritance. The front door chimed softly, breaking my reverie. I found a thick envelope on the mat, but it lacked the aggressive weight of a legal summons. It was a letter from Caleb, postmarked from a town 2 states away. I nearly tossed it into the recycling bin. Curiosity won. I sliced the paper open with a kitchen knife. Inside was a cashier's check for $300. It was small, but the paper felt heavy. A handwritten note accompanied the modest, surprising payment. Caleb wrote about a plumbing apprenticeship he had finally finished. He spoke of early mornings and stained hands. There were no excuses about market headwinds or family obligations. He simply stated he was working toward the debt he owed the estate. He wasn't asking for a place to stay or a loan. He was admitting that the world owed him nothing. I sat on my porch and watched the sunset. The man who wanted my house was finally building his own life. I didn't call him. I didn't send a text of forgiveness. Instead, I drove to the local community college and spoke to the bursar. I used Caleb's check to open a small scholarship fund for vocational students. It would be awarded to those who worked full time while studying. I wanted the money to go where it was originally denied. It was the only way to balance the ledger. Caleb's labor would now fund someone else's survival. The cycle was finally shifting. My business continued to thrive, but I worked fewer hours now. I spent my afternoons teaching my daughter how to use a hammer. We were fixing a birdhouse together under the oak tree. My hands were rough, but my mind was quiet. The lie that I needed their validation had vanished like smoke. I was the architect of my own worth. I looked at my daughter and realized she would never know the sting of a $1 birthday. That was my victory. As we finished the birdhouse, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from an old family group chat I had forgotten to leave. My father had posted a photo of a small apartment. It was clean and modest. Starting over, the caption read, "There were no pleas for help. There were no accusations of greed." I stared at the image for a long time before hitting the delete button. The house of cards was gone. I walked inside and locked the door.